The desert night sat heavy over Fort Dawson, like a held breath. 2,300 hours. That dead zone between the last patrol and the first formation, when the base existed in a kind of mechanical twilight. Diesel engines idled in the motor pool, their rumble constant as a heartbeat. Security checkpoints crackled with radio static. Inside the barracks, boots struck tile with scattered rhythms, each footfall echoing down corridors that had
We
seen
stand
30
united
years
under
of
this
soldiers
flag,
come and go.
committed to the values that define
Nothing
us as a
looked
nation
wrong,
and as
nothing
a force
felt
for
wrong.
good in the world.
But beneath the fluorescent hum and the everyday sounds of military life, something had been rotting for months. The story of how 3 generals shut down an entire United States Army base overnight didn't begin with a scandal or a security breach. It didn't start with classified documents or a foreign threat. It started in a dim hallway with a 23-year-old woman and a slap that would expose the decay underneath. But first, let's go back. 12 hours before the generals arrived, before the military police descended, before Fort Dawson learned what happens when silence finally breaks. 0103 hours, the main gate. 3 black SUVs rolled through the checkpoint in formation, their headlights cutting through the New Mexico darkness like searchlights. The guard on duty, a specialist barely 6 months out of basic training, stiffened when he saw the flag mounted on the lead vehicle. A 3-star general, at 1 in the morning. He snapped to attention so fast, his rifle nearly slipped from his shoulder. The second SUV carried a 2-star, the third a 1-star. 3 general officers arriving unannounced in the middle of the night. The specialist had been in the Army long enough to know that nothing good traveled in threes. Lieutenant General Raymond Hatcher stepped from the lead vehicle, 61 years old, with a face carved from hard experience and eyes that had seen men die for good reasons and bad. He wore his dress uniform, despite the hour, every ribbon and badge perfectly aligned. This wasn't a surprise inspection. This was a reckoning. The specialist managed a salute. "Sir, is there an emergency?" Hatcher returned the salute with a military precision. His voice carried the flat authority of someone who had given orders in combat and expected them followed without question. "Fort Dawson died 6 months ago, son. We're just here to confirm the time of death." He walked past without waiting for a response, his boots striking the pavement in measured cadence. Behind him, Brigadier General Patricia Blackwell and Major General Douglas Merrick fell into step. No small talk, no explanations. Just 3 senior officers moving with the focused purpose of surgeons approaching an operating table. Inside the lead SUV, a 4th figure remained seated. Colonel Nathaniel Graves, Inspector General, with a briefcase full of documentation that would end careers before sunrise. He checked his watch. 16 months of investigation. 6 months of active surveillance. And finally, tonight, the proof they needed. All because of one corporal who refused to stay silent. 12 hours earlier, 1100 hours, the same day, Corporal Reese Thornton stood at parade rest outside the company headquarters, waiting. The New Mexico sun hammered down on the tarmac, turning the air into something you could almost chew. Sweat traced lines down her spine beneath her uniform, but she didn't move, didn't shift her weight, didn't wipe her forehead. 5 years in the Army had taught her that stillness was its own form of strength. 23 years old, 5'6", 130 pounds of discipline wrapped in desert camouflage. Brown hair pulled back in a regulation bun, so tight it could survive a sandstorm. Her uniform carried no decorations beyond the standard ribbons, no Ranger tab or Special Forces patch. Just a corporal's chevrons and a combat action badge from a deployment to Syria that she never talked about. She wasn't the kind of soldier who demanded attention, wasn't loud, wasn't flashy, but everyone in Bravo Company knew Corporal Thornton, knew that when she said something, it was worth hearing, knew that her word carried weight because she never wasted it. The door opened. Captain Everett Drummond stepped out, 35 years old and hungry for his next promotion. He glanced at Reese with the kind of calculated indifference that officers reserved for problems they wanted to pretend didn't exist. "Thornton, this about the incident yesterday?" She kept her eyes forward. "Yes, sir." "The one you already reported to Sergeant Calloway?" "Yes, sir." Drummond sighed, like a man being asked to lift something heavy for no good reason. "Look, I read your statement. Private Brennan says Corporal Whitfield made inappropriate comments. Whitfield says he was joking around, and she took it wrong. He said, she said, nothing I can act on. Reese's jaw tightened a fraction of an inch. Sir, this is the third time Brennan has reported harassment from Whitfield. There's a pattern of what Thornton soldiers talking trash to each other. This is the Army, not a college campus. Drummond adjusted his patrol cap, already moving to dismiss her. Tell Brennan if it happens again, she should handle it at her level. We don't need to make everything an official complaint. With respect, sir, she tried handling it at her level. Whitfield didn't stop. Drummond's expression hardened. You want my advice, Corporal? Stop looking for problems. This company has one of the best discipline records in the battalion. I'd like to keep it that way. He let that hang in the air between them, like a threat wrapped in suggestion. We clear? Reese held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Long enough to let him know she understood perfectly. Short enough to avoid insubordination. Crystal clear, sir? She saluted. He returned it without enthusiasm. The door closed between them. Reese stood there another 10 seconds processing. This was the 4th time in 3 months that Captain Drummond had brushed aside a complaint. The 4th time he had chosen the appearance of good order over the reality of it. She turned and walked back toward the barracks, her mind already cataloging details, the way she had been trained to catalog enemy positions. What Captain Drummond didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Corporal Reese Thornton had been keeping a record. A small notebook civilian bot carried in her assault pack. 4 months of documentation. Names, dates, incidents, 12 cases of harassment, 3 assaults, 8 official reports that had mysteriously disappeared from the system. She wasn't gathering evidence for any particular purpose. She was doing it because her older brother Tommy had taught her something before the oxycodone took him at 19. He had said, Reese, the world lies. People forget. But if you write it down, it stays true. So she wrote it down. Every incident she witnessed, every complaint that got buried, every time someone in authority chose silence over accountability. The notebook was hidden in her wall locker, wrapped in a PT shirt underneath her dress uniform. She had no idea that in 11 hours, that notebook would change everything. 1,400 hours. The rifle range. Master Sergeant Vaughn Calloway stood in the tower binoculars, raised watching his soldiers qualify on their weapons. 58 years old, 34 years in service with a Ranger tab, and 3 combat deployments that had left scars he never showed, and memories he never shared. His hair had gone steel gray, his face mapped with lines earned in places the Army didn't like to advertise. Iraq, twice. Afghanistan, once. Somalia before that, back when people still cared about what happened in Mogadishu. He watched a young private fumble with her magazine reload and made a mental note. Good trigger discipline, sloppy mechanical skills, fixable. Below him, the range safety officer called a ceasefire. Calloway lowered his binoculars and saw Corporal Thornton approaching across the firing line, her weapon cleared and locked. She climbed the tower steps with the efficient economy of movement that marked experienced soldiers. Sergeant Calloway, got a minute. He gestured toward the corner of the tower, away from the other NCOs. They moved into the shade of the overhead cover. What's on your mind, Thornton? She told him about Captain Drummond, about Private Brennan, about the pattern of complaints being dismissed. Her voice stayed level professional, but Calloway heard the frustration underneath. He had been hearing that same frustration for 6 months now from different soldiers about different incidents, all of them hitting the same wall. When she finished, Calloway was quiet for a long moment. Down on the range, rifles barked in controlled pairs. Brass casings pinged on concrete. The smell of gunpowder drifted up on the desert wind. I believe you, he said finally, and I believe Brennan, but here's the reality, Corporal. I've been filing reports for 8 months. Every single one gets acknowledged, processed, and filed away. Nothing changes. He met her eyes. I tried to push harder 3 months ago. Got called into the battalion commander's office and told I was damaging unit cohesion with excessive disciplinary actions. Reese absorbed this. So we just stop reporting? I didn't say that. I said nothing changes. Calloway looked out over the range toward the mountains beyond. 20 years ago, I served under a colonel who told me something I didn't understand at the time. He said the worst thing about a broken system isn't that it's broken. It's that it convinces good people to stop trying to fix it. You stopped trying, Sergeant. The question carried no accusation, but Calloway felt it anyway. I got tired, Thornton. That's the truth. I got tired of fighting battles I couldn't win. He turned back to her. But you're not tired yet. So keep filing reports. Keep documenting. Maybe nothing happens. Or maybe someday someone who can actually do something will ask for evidence. And you'll have it. Reese nodded slowly. She didn't know that Master Sergeant Calloway was telling her this for a reason. Didn't know that he had been watching her for months, noting her integrity, her discipline, her refusal to compromise. Didn't know that 3 weeks ago, he had written a confidential memo to the Inspector General's office, identifying Corporal Reese Thornton as a soldier whose testimony could be trusted absolutely. She saluted and headed back down the tower. Calloway watched her go, hoping he had said the right thing, hoping she wouldn't get crushed by the same system that had worn him down. He had no idea that in 9 hours, everything he had given up fighting for would suddenly matter again. 1,800 hours. The dining facility. Dinner rush at Fort Dawson meant 800 soldiers cycling through in 90-minute waves. Reese sat at a corner table with 3 other corporals from Bravo Company eating chicken that tasted like the color beige and vegetables that had given up on life somewhere between the freezer and the steam table. Across from her sat Private First Class Garrett Hollis, 23 years old, same age as Reese, same basic training cycle 3 years ago. They had been friends once. Good friends. The kind of friendship that forms when 2 people survive Fort Benning together, when they pull each other through ruck marches and obstacle courses and drill sergeants who seemed personally offended by their existence. Garrett had covered for Reese when she got food poisoning during land navigation training. Reese had tutored Garrett through the written exams when his dyslexia made the words swim on the page. They had made private jokes about their drill sergeant's mustache and shared contraband candy bars smuggled past inspections. That was 3 years ago, before Fort Dawson. Before Garrett's father, Lieutenant Colonel Theodore Hollis, started calling every week to ask why his son hadn't made specialist yet. Before Garrett discovered that whiskey could make the pressure feel lighter, at least temporarily. Before resentment started growing like mold in dark places. Now, they sat across from each other in silence, eating without tasting the friendship, a ghost that haunted the space between them. Garrett broke the quiet first. Heard you talk to Drummond about Brennan again. Reese kept her eyes on her tray. That's between me and the captain. Everyone knows you're the one filing all these reports, making the whole company look bad. She looked up then. Garrett's eyes were red-rimmed, his jaw tight. He had been drinking. Not here, not now, but recently enough that she could see the hangover written in the tension around his mouth. I'm documenting violations of the UCMJ. That's my responsibility. Your responsibility is to your squad, to your platoon, not to play detective and make everyone else look like criminals. Garrett's voice rose slightly enough that the soldiers at nearby tables glanced over. You used to understand that, back when we were friends. We're still friends, Garrett. No, we're not. He stood abruptly, his tray clattering. Friends have each other's backs. You just have your own. He walked away before Reese could respond, dumping his half-eaten meal in the trash with more force than necessary. Reese sat there, appetite gone, the chicken now completely inedible. She had no way of knowing that Garrett Hollis had spent the previous night drinking alone in his room, staring at his phone, reading text messages from his father. Your brother made specialist in 18 months. You're at 36 and still a PFC. What's wrong with you? No way of knowing that Garrett had been carrying a flask of whiskey for 3 weeks now, taking pulls between formations just enough to take the edge off the shame that followed him like a shadow. No way of knowing that he blamed her specifically, her for every time he fell short. Because if Corporal Perfect wasn't around making everyone else look bad, maybe he would shine brighter. No way of knowing that in 5 hours, all that resentment would turn into violence. 2,100 hours. The barracks. Reese sat on her bunk in the small room she shared with Private Brennan, updating her notebook. The entry for today was brief. 1400. Reported Brennan harassment to Captain Drummond. Dismissed without action. Pattern continues. Brennan was out, probably in the day room, watching television with other soldiers, trying to pretend she wasn't scared of going to work tomorrow. Reese wrote for another 10 minutes, then closed the notebook and hid it in its usual place. She changed into PT gear shorts and an army t-shirt and headed down to the small fitness room in the basement. Most soldiers worked out during normal hours, but Reese preferred the late shift. Fewer people, fewer conversations. Just her and the weights and the rhythm of exertion. She loaded the bar for squats and started her routine. The gym was empty, except for her and the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Each rep pushed her thoughts quieter. Each set focused her mind. This was meditation in motion, the only kind that ever worked for her. Upstairs, 4 floors above, Garrett Hollis sat in his room with his roommate gone for the weekend. He pulled the flask from his cargo pocket and took a long drink. Then another. The whiskey burned going down, but settled warm in his chest. He had already had 3 beers after dinner. The flask was supposed to be his limit, but limits kept moving tonight. He thought about Reese, about how she always did everything right, how she made it look easy, how even when they failed together in training, she somehow found a way to pass, and he somehow found a way to barely scrape by. He thought about his father's last phone call. "Son, I'm embarrassed to tell people what rank you are." Garrett took another drink. The whiskey made the anger feel justified instead of pathetic. 2,200 hours. The barracks hallway. Reese finished her workout and headed toward the showers, a towel draped over her shoulder, her t-shirt dark with sweat. The hallway was empty. Most soldiers either asleep or out in town on weekend passes. The fluorescent tubes cast everything in their particular shade of institutional white, making the walls look like they went on forever. She pushed open the door to the latrine and stepped into the harsh echo of tile and running water. 15 minutes later, she emerged clean and tired, ready for sleep. She padded down the hallway in shower shoes, her wet hair dripping onto her shoulders. That's when she heard the footsteps behind her. Heavy, uneven, the rhythm wrong. She turned and saw Garrett rounding the corner from the stairwell. His eyes were unfocused, his face flushed. The smell hit her before he spoke. Whiskey, cheap strong, and too much of it. "Garrett, you okay?" He stopped 10 feet away, swaying slightly. When he spoke, his words came out thick and slurred. "Reese, we need to talk." She kept her voice calm, the way you talk to someone standing too close to an edge. "It's late. Let's talk tomorrow when you're sober." "No, now." He took a step closer. "You think you're better than me, than all of us. That's not true. You need to go to bed, Garrett. Stop telling me what to do." His voice cracked too loud in the empty hallway. "You're always telling everyone what to do, filing reports, making people look bad, playing perfect soldier while the rest of us just try to survive." Reese felt the hallway shrink around them. She had dealt with drunk soldiers before, had been trained in de-escalation, but this was different. This was personal rage mixed with alcohol, and she could see in his eyes that something had broken loose inside him. "Garrett, I'm your friend. I want to help. You're not my friend. You reported me, last month, when I missed that training formation." His fists clenched. "Sergeant Calloway asked the squad what happened, and you told him I wasn't there. You could have covered for me. Friends cover for each other." "You did miss the formation. I didn't lie about it." "That's your problem, Reese. You never lie. You never bend. You never understand that sometimes people need a break. That sometimes the rules are bullshit. That sometimes being perfect makes everyone around you look like failures." He was closer now, close enough that she could see the broken blood vessels in his eyes, smell the whiskey on his breath. "My dad called me today. Told me I'm an embarrassment. You know what that feels like? To be an embarrassment? Garrett, your dad is wrong. You're a good soldier. Don't lie to me now. We both know I'm not. But maybe I could be if you weren't around making everyone else look weak." His voice dropped to something dangerous. "Maybe if you weren't here, people would notice me. Maybe if you made just one mistake, just one people would see I'm trying." Reese took a careful breath. "I'm going to my room now. You should go to yours. Sleep this off. Tomorrow we'll talk, okay? She turned to walk away. That's when Garrett's control finally shattered. Don't walk away from me. His hand shot out. Not a grab, not a shove. A clean, open-handed strike across her face. The sound cracked down the hallway like a rifle shot, sharp and final. Reese's head jerked sideways. Pain exploded across her cheekbone, hot and electric. The shock registered through her whole body, freezing her for a moment that stretched and stretched. She didn't stumble, didn't fall. But her hand went to her face, automatically, fingers pressing against skin that was already beginning to swell. Garrett stood there, his arms still raised, his expression morphing from rage to horror as he realized what he had just done. His breathing came in ragged gasps. His hand trembled. Reese, I didn't. She lowered her hand. Her voice came out steady despite the tears that wanted to form. Yes, you did. You pushed me. You made me. This is your fault. He was backing away now, his words tumbling over each other, trying to rewrite what had just happened. You provoked me. You did this to yourself. No, Garrett, you chose this. He turned and ran. His boots hammered down the hallway toward the stairwell, the sound echoing off the walls, until a door slammed somewhere below and silence returned. Reese stood alone in the empty corridor, her cheek throbbing with her pulse. She could taste copper, where she had bitten the inside of her mouth. Her shower shoes felt too small. Her towel had fallen to the floor. Everything felt simultaneously too sharp and not quite real. She didn't cry, didn't shout, didn't chase him. Instead, she walked to her room, closed the door, and sat on her bunk. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline catching up, making her fingers twitch. She looked at her phone on the nightstand. For exactly 60 seconds, she sat there deciding. Thinking about what Master Sergeant Calloway had said. Thinking about Captain Drummond's dismissals. Thinking about her brother Tommy and how he had told her to write things down so they stayed true. She thought about how easy it would be to say nothing, to just go to sleep, to pretend it didn't happen. How much simpler that would be. No paperwork, no questions, no making waves. Then she thought about Private Brennan, who had reported harassment 3 times and got nothing. About Corporal Whitfield, who faced no consequences. About every soldier who had stayed silent, because speaking up only made things worse. Reese picked up her phone. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Then she opened her messages and typed with deliberate precision. MS Chief Calloway, need to report assault. Location Bravo Barracks, 3rd floor. I'm okay. Thornton. She hit send. The message disappeared into the digital void. Delivered. Red receipt showing Calloway had seen it. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. Then her phone buzzed. Stay where you are. I'm coming. Don't move. Reese set the phone down. She went to her wall locker and pulled out her small notebook, the one with 4 months of documentation. She set it on her bunk next to her phone. Then she sat down and waited, her hand pressed to her swelling cheek, her breathing steady and controlled. She had no idea that her message had just started a chain reaction that would reach all the way to Washington. No idea that Master Sergeant Calloway would make 3 phone calls that would wake up commanding officers across Fort Dawson. No idea that within 40 minutes, Lieutenant General Raymond Hatcher would receive a call that would make him promise once again that no soldier would suffer what his son had suffered. No idea that 3 black SUVs were already being fueled and prepared for a midnight drive. All she knew was that she had done what she had been trained to do since the first day of basic training. Report immediately, report accurately, report without fear or favor. The rest was out of her hands now. 2,300 hours. Outside Master Sergeant Calloway's quarters. Vaughn Calloway lived on base in the senior NCO, housing a small apartment that smelled like coffee and gun oil and 3 decades of military service. When his phone buzzed at 23:12 hours, he was already in bed, but not yet asleep. The message from Thornton lit up his screen, and every instinct he had developed over 34 years told him this was different from every other report he had filed and watched disappear. Assault. Bravo Barracks. Thornton. He was out of bed in seconds, throwing on his uniform without bothering to tuck the shirt. He called the CQ desk while lacing his boots. This is Master Sergeant Calloway. I need you to radio the duty officer. Tell him I'm responding to an assault in Bravo Barracks, and he needs to meet me there in 10 minutes. He didn't wait for acknowledgement. Next call, military police. Third call, company commander. By the time he was out his door and moving toward his truck, the machinery was in motion. He didn't know it yet, but that machinery would keep grinding upward through the chain of command until it reached levels that could actually force change. He reached Bravo Barracks in 6 minutes, taking the stairs 2 at a time, despite his 58 years. When he rounded the corner to the 3rd floor, he saw Reese Thornton standing at parade rest outside her door. The discipline in that posture, despite the visible swelling on her left cheek, despite everything, hit him harder than any briefing ever could. "Thornton, what happened?" she told him. Clean, precise, no embellishment. PFC Hollis. Intoxicated. Verbal confrontation. Physical assault. Single strike to the face. Suspect fled toward the stairwell. Time of incident approximately 22:55 hours. Calloway looked at her cheek, already turning purple. "You need medical attention." "No, Sergeant. I just need this documented." That answer, delivered with complete calm, with her hand still unconsciously pressed to her face, chilled Calloway more than if she had been crying or angry. This was a soldier who understood exactly how broken the system was and was choosing to trust it anyway. "Okay, Corporal. We're doing everything by the book. Everything." He keyed his radio. "CQ desk. This is Calloway. I need the duty officer's ETA. Also notify the battalion duty officer we have a credible assault with injuries. Victim is stable and alert." The radio crackled back. "Duty officer is 2 minutes out. Battalion duty officer has been notified." Calloway turned back to Reese. "This goes up the chain, Thornton. All the way up. You understand that?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Good." He paused. "For what it's worth, you did the right thing. The only thing." She nodded once, and something in that small gesture made Calloway think of his own daughter, who was 25 and teaching elementary school in Ohio, and had never had to make the kind of choice Reese had just made. He felt suddenly overwhelmingly grateful that his daughter would never know what it was like to stand in a barracks hallway with a swollen face and trust that justice would come. But he also felt something else: pride in this corporal who refused to let the system grind her down. The duty officer arrived, then the company commander, then the military police. By 00:30 hours, PFC Garrett Hollis had been found hiding behind the motor pool, drunk and crying, and insisting it wasn't his fault. By 0100 hours, the battalion commander had been woken up and briefed. And at 0115 hours, when the brigade commander called Lieutenant General Hatcher to inform him of the incident, everything changed. Because Raymond Hatcher had made a promise 3 years ago, standing at his son's grave. A promise that he would never let another soldier suffer in silence. That he would never let another commanding officer sweep misconduct under the rug to protect statistics and promotion packets. His son, Second Lieutenant Daniel Hatcher, had been bullied and hazed until he put his service weapon in his mouth and pulled the trigger. The investigation had been buried. The responsible officers had been quietly transferred. And Raymond Hatcher had learned that sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to tear it down and rebuild from scratch. So, when he heard about Corporal Reese Thornton, he made 2 phone calls. One to General Blackwell, one to General Merrick. Then, he got dressed, walked out to his staff car, and told his driver to head to Fort Dawson. Behind him, in his office, a file sat on his desk. A confidential report from the Inspector General. 6 months of investigation into Fort Dawson. Pages of testimony. Documentation of a culture where reporting misconduct was punished and silence was rewarded. Where good soldiers kept their heads down and bad leaders kept their jobs. The report was nearly complete. It just needed one final piece. One credible witness who could testify to the pattern. One soldier brave enough to stand up when everyone else had learned to sit down. Corporal Reese Thornton had just become that soldier. At 0103 hours, 3 black SUVs rolled through the main gate of Fort Dawson. The specialist on duty snapped his best salute as Lieutenant General Hatcher stepped out into the desert night, his uniform immaculate, his expression carved from granite. Inside Bravo Barracks. Reese Thornton sat in her room, her notebook on her lap, waiting. She didn't know about the generals yet. didn't know about the Inspector General's investigation, didn't know that her 4 months of documentation was about to become evidence in the largest culture purge Fort Dawson had ever seen. All she knew was that her cheek hurt. Her hands had finally stopped shaking, and she had done what her brother Tommy had taught her. She had written it down so it stayed true. The rest, whatever came next, was out of her control. But it was coming, fast and unavoidable as a desert sandstorm, and Fort Dawson would never be the same. 0130 hours, battalion conference room. The lights came on all at once, flooding the room with the kind of harsh fluorescence that made everyone look like they had been awake for 3 days. Which by morning, some of them would be. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes stumbled in wearing PT shorts and an unbuttoned uniform top, his hair standing at angles that suggested he had been pulled from deep sleep. Captain Drummond arrived 2 minutes later, his uniform more complete, but his face showing the same confusion. 4 other officers filtered in along with the senior NCOs, all of them wearing various states of dress and the universal expression of people who knew something terrible had happened, but didn't yet know how terrible. They took seats around the long conference table, the same table where they had held countless briefings about training schedules and equipment maintenance and readiness reports. The same table where 3 months ago Captain Drummond had presented his company's discipline statistics and received commendation for maintaining such good order. That table was about to become ground zero for the systematic dismantling of Fort Dawson's command structure. Lieutenant General Raymond Hatcher stood at the head of the table. He had not sat down, had not removed his cap, had not offered any of the pleasantries that usually preceded late-night emergency meetings. He simply stood there, his hands clasped behind his back, and waited for everyone to settle. Brigadier General Patricia Blackwell sat to his right. 52 years old, with iron gray hair cut shorter than most of the men in the room, and a reputation for being absolutely inflexible when it came to standards and discipline. She had prosecuted generals for misconduct. A room full of field-grade officers and senior NCOs was barely worth her attention. Major General Douglas Merrick sat to Hatcher's left. 57-years-old combat veteran of 2 wars, with 3 Purple Hearts and a philosophy that the Army either took care of its soldiers or it deserved to fail. He was the kind of general who knew every private's name in his command and could tell you which ones were struggling and which ones just needed someone to believe in them. Together, the 3 of them represented over 90 years of military service. They had seen the Army at its best and its worst. And right now, looking at the confused, frightened faces around the table, they were preparing to show Fort Dawson what accountability looked like. Colonel Nathaniel Graves entered last, carrying his briefcase. He took a seat against the wall, saying nothing. His presence alone was enough to make several officers shift uncomfortably in their chairs. Inspector General, the Army's internal affairs, the people who ended careers. Hatcher let the silence stretch for exactly 15 seconds. Then he spoke, his voice carrying the flat surgical precision of someone who had already made every decision and was simply implementing them now. I am not here because of an assault. I am here because the assault was predictable, preventable, and symptomatic of a culture failure on this installation. Someone's pen dropped. The sound seemed unnaturally loud. Fort Dawson is now under full operational lockdown, effective immediately. All training exercises are suspended. All operations are frozen. All personnel movement is restricted to essential duties only. This lockdown will remain in place for a minimum of 72 hours while we conduct a comprehensive investigation into the command climate and disciplinary procedures of this installation. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes found his voice, though it came out smaller than he probably intended. Sir, with respect, what assault are we talking about? Hatcher's gaze settled on Hayes like a targeting laser. At approximately 22:55 hours last night, Corporal Reese Thornton was physically assaulted by Private First Class Garrett Hollis in the Bravo Company barracks. The assault was unprovoked, occurred in a common area, and resulted from what appears to be a pattern of escalating misconduct that this command has systematically ignored. Captain Drummond's face went white. Hatcher noted it, but continued without pause. PFC Hollis has been apprehended by military police. He tested positive for alcohol with a blood alcohol content of 0.12%. He is currently in custody, pending charges under Article 128 of the UCMJ for assault Article 134. For drunken conduct, and additional charges are being considered. Brigadier General Blackwell opened a folder in front of her. Her voice was cooler than the New Mexico desert at 3 in the morning. But PFC Hollis is not why we are here. He is a symptom. We are here to address the disease. She pulled out a document and slid it across the table toward Hayes. This is Corporal Thornton's statement. In it, she details the assault. She also mentions that this is not the first incident she has reported to her chain of command. In fact, she states that over the past 4 months, she has reported or witnessed 12 separate incidents of harassment, 3 incidents of assault, and has seen 8 official reports disappear from the system. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Major General Merrick leaned forward. Corporal Thornton has been keeping a personal record, a notebook with dates, times, names, and detailed descriptions of incidents that were either ignored or actively suppressed by this command. He paused. That notebook is now evidence in an Inspector General investigation that has been ongoing for 6 months. Colonel Graves spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the kind of bureaucratic finality that made strong men want to confess to things they hadn't done. For the record, this investigation was initiated 4 months ago, following a complaint from a soldier who alleged sexual assault and subsequently withdrew her statement after, and I quote, being advised by her chain of command that pursuing the complaint would damage unit cohesion and her future career prospects. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes executions. Hatcher's expression never changed. We will begin interviews immediately. Every officer and senior NCO in this room will be questioned. Every soldier in Bravo Company will be questioned. Every incident documented in Corporal Thornton's notebook will be investigated. He let that settle. If we find that reports were deliberately suppressed, if we find that soldiers were discouraged from reporting misconduct, if we find that anyone in this chain of command prioritized statistics over standards, there will be consequences. Am I clear? A chorus of, "Yes, sir," went around the table, each voice carrying its own particular flavor of fear. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes tried again. "Sir, I want to assure you that this command takes all allegations seriously. If there were incidents that were mishandled, I will personally ensure that we conduct a thorough review and implement corrective measures." Hatcher's eyes narrowed a fraction of an inch. It was like watching a blade being unsheathed. "Lieutenant Colonel, you will not be conducting anything. You are now a subject of this investigation. Until further notice, you are relieved of command and will confine yourself to your quarters except when required for interviews." Hayes went gray. "Sir, you are dismissed, Lieutenant Colonel." Hayes stood on legs that didn't seem entirely stable. He saluted mechanical and hollow and walked out of the room. The door closed behind him with a sound like a cell locking. Hatcher turned to Captain Drummond. "Captain, you will also confine yourself to quarters. You are suspended from all duties pending investigation." Drummond's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Then in a voice that cracked slightly, "Sir, I need to understand what I'm being accused of." Brigadier General Blackwell answered him. "You are being investigated for dereliction of duty, failure to maintain good order and discipline, and possible obstruction of justice. Specifically, you are suspected of deliberately dismissing valid reports of harassment and assault in order to maintain artificially low incident statistics for the purpose of enhancing your evaluation reports. That's not I was just trying to handle things at the appropriate level. By telling soldiers not to make things official. By telling them to handle harassment at their level." Blackwell's voice could have etched glass. "That's not leadership, Captain. That's negligence at best and misconduct at worst." Drummond seemed to age 10 years in 10 seconds. He saluted and left his shoulders hunched like a man walking into a strong wind. 2 more company commanders were suspended before the meeting ended. 4 NCOs were placed under investigation. By 0200 hours, half the leadership of Fort Dawson had been effectively decapitated, and the night was far from over. 0215 hours. Small conference room building 47. Reese Thornton sat in a chair that was trying to be comfortable and failing. Master Sergeant Calloway stood behind her, and to the left a silent presence that somehow made her feel less alone. Her cheek had swollen more over the past hour, the bruise spreading in shades of purple and deep red. A medic had checked her, declared nothing broken, offered ice. She had accepted the ice, but only held it against her face for a few minutes before setting it aside. The cold made her thoughts fuzzy, and she needed clarity right now. The door opened. She started to stand, saw the stars on the collar of the officer entering, and snapped to attention so fast the chair scraped backward. "At ease, Corporal." Lieutenant General Hatcher's voice was gentler than it had been in the conference room, but still carried absolute authority. "Please sit down." She sat. Her hands wanted to shake, but she wouldn't let them. Hatcher took the seat across from her. Generals Blackwell and Merrick remained standing by the door present, but giving Hatcher the floor. He looked at Reese for a long moment, not at the bruise, but at her eyes, measuring something. "Corporal Thornton, I want to start by saying that you are not in trouble. You are not being investigated. You are the reason we are here, but you are not the problem. Do you understand that?" "Yes, sir." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Good." Hatcher leaned back slightly, his posture relaxing a fraction. "I'm going to ask you to walk me through what happened tonight. Take your time. Be specific. If you need to stop, we stop. If you need water, we get water. This is not an interrogation. This is your opportunity to tell the truth to people who will actually listen." So, she told him. Started with Garrett in the dining facility, the tension that had been building for weeks. Moved through the encounter in the hallway, the smell of whiskey. The words exchanged described the moment his hand struck her face with the clinical precision of someone giving a range report. She didn't editorialize, didn't add emotional color, just facts in chronological order. When she finished, the room was quiet except for the hum of the ventilation system. Major General Merrick spoke, his voice surprisingly soft. "Corporal, you said PFC Hollis accused you of making him look bad by filing reports. Can you tell us about those reports?" Reese hesitated. This was the moment. She could minimize. Could say it was just a few things, nothing major. Could protect herself by not rocking the boat any harder than it was already rocking. Instead, she reached into the cargo pocket of her pants and pulled out the notebook. Small, spiral-bound civilian purchase from the PX. She set it on the table between them. "I've been keeping a record, sir, of incidents I've witnessed or that were reported to me. I started 4 months ago, after I saw a pattern developing." Hatcher picked up the notebook, opened it, started reading. His expression never changed, but something in the set of his jaw grew harder with each page he turned. Blackwell moved closer, reading over his shoulder. Merrick joined them. The three generals stood there reading entries written in Reese's careful, precise handwriting. Dates, times, names, descriptions. June 15th. Private Brennan reported verbal harassment by Corporal Whitfield during PT formation. Reported to Captain Drummond. No action taken. June 22nd. Witnessed Specialist Martinez being touched inappropriately by Sergeant Holcomb in the supply room. Martinez declined to file official report, stated she had reported similar incident previously, and was told she was being too sensitive. July 3rd. Private Anderson reported being shoved against a wall by PFC Daniels during an argument about room cleanliness. Filed official complaint with company commander. Complaint not entered into system. July 10th. Corporal Whitfield made sexually explicit comments to Private Brennan in front of 5 witnesses. Brennan reported to Captain Drummond. Captain Drummond advised Brennan to grow thicker skin and handle it at her level. The entries went on, page after page. 12 cases of harassment, 3 assaults, 8 reports that disappeared into bureaucratic void. And through it all, one name appearing over and over as the terminus point where complaints went to die. Captain Everett Drummond. Hatcher closed the notebook. He looked at Reese with something that might have been admiration, or might have been sadness, or might have been both. "Corporal, why didn't you bring this forward sooner?" She met his eyes. "Sir, I did. I reported every incident I witnessed through my chain of command. This notebook was just my personal record, because I saw the official reports weren't going anywhere. I didn't know who else to tell. Why keep it at all?" Reese thought about Tommy, about his last coherent words before the drugs took him completely. "Write it down, Reese. Make it stay true. My brother taught me that the world forgets, sir, but writing doesn't. I wanted there to be a record, in case anyone ever cared enough to look. Brigadier General Blackwell's voice cut in sharp and precise. Corporal, your integrity tonight may very well save this base. You understand that? Reese didn't know how to answer that, so she just nodded. Hatcher stood, and she automatically started to rise. He gestured for her to stay seated. One more question, Corporal. After PFC Hollis struck you, why did you report it? You must have known it would cause problems, would draw attention. Why not just let it go? She thought about that, about how easy it would have been to stay silent, about Private Brennan and Specialist Martinez and all the others who had reported and been dismissed, about the choice between easy and right. Because if I didn't report it, sir, then what was the point of writing any of it down? And if I wrote it down but didn't act on it, then I was just as bad as everyone else who saw and stayed silent. Hatcher held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he did something unexpected. He came to attention and rendered her a salute. A general saluting a corporal. Reese scrambled to her feet and returned it completely off balance. Corporal Thornton, you have upheld Army values tonight when many others around you did not. That takes courage. Most people will never be asked to demonstrate. He lowered his salute. You're dismissed. Get some rest. We will need your testimony in the coming days, but for now, you've done enough. She saluted Master Sergeant Calloway on her way out. In the hallway, her legs felt uncertain beneath her. She had just been saluted by a 3-star general. Her notebook was now evidence. Everything was moving too fast, and she couldn't quite process it all. Calloway caught up with her at the exit. Thornton, you okay? I don't know, Sergeant. I really don't know. He put a hand on her shoulder, brief and paternal. What you did in there, that's the hardest thing a soldier can do. Not the physical courage. The moral kind. The kind that doesn't get medals most of the time, but keeps the Army from rotting from the inside. Did I just end Captain Drummond's career? No. He ended his own career the first time he ignored a report. You just made it official. Calloway squeezed her shoulder once. Get some sleep if you can. Tomorrow's going to be intense. She walked back to the barracks alone, the New Mexico night cool on her face, and tried not to think about what came next. 0300 hours. The motor pool. Military police had found PFC Garrett Hollis 45 minutes after the assault hiding behind a 5-ton truck in the motor pool. He wasn't running anymore. Wasn't angry anymore. He was sitting on the ground with his back against the tire, crying like a child. When the MPs approached with flashlights and authoritative voices, he didn't resist, didn't argue. Just put his hands up and started talking in a stream of consciousness confession that made their job significantly easier. She made me do it. She kept reporting me, kept making me look bad. She was supposed to be my friend, but she just kept being perfect. And I couldn't keep up. And my dad kept calling. And I just needed her to stop. For 1 second. Just stop being so perfect. And I didn't mean to hit her. I mean, I did. But I didn't. I was just so angry. And the whiskey made it worse. And I just wanted her to see what it felt like to fail at something just once. Sir, you need to stop talking. The MP corporal had seen enough drunk confessions to know this one needed to be on record. We're taking you into custody. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court-martial. Garrett kept talking anyway. All the way to the MP station. All the way through the booking process. All the way until they put him in a holding cell and the door locked with a finality that seemed to penetrate even his whiskey-soaked consciousness. Then he fell silent. Sat on the metal bunk. Put his face in his hands. In a different timeline, maybe someone would have gotten him help before it came to this. Maybe someone would have noticed a soldier drinking alone every night, would have seen the pressure building, would have intervened. But Fort Dawson had been too busy maintaining good statistics to notice soldiers falling apart. Now, Garrett sat in a cell, facing assault charges, drunken conduct charges, and the very real possibility of a dishonorable discharge. His father would call soon, would want to know what happened, would ask how his son had failed this spectacularly. Garrett didn't have an answer for that, didn't have an answer for anything, except that he had been angry and drunk and convinced that Reese Thornton was the reason for all his problems, And now he knew, with the clarity that comes too late, that he had been wrong. He had done this to himself. Every choice, every drink, every moment he blamed someone else for his shortcomings. It had all led to a hallway and a moment of violence he could never take back. The military police report would note that PFC Hollis was cooperative after arrest, that he made several incriminating statements, that his blood alcohol content was 0.12%, well over the legal limit, that he showed signs of long-term alcohol abuse. What the report wouldn't capture was the sound of a 23-year-old man realizing he had just destroyed his own life and hurt someone who had once been his friend. That sound was just for Garrett alone in a cell, while the night crawled toward dawn. 0400 hours. Emergency briefing, main post auditorium. By 0400 hours, every senior NCO and officer on Fort Dawson, who wasn't currently under investigation, had been summoned to the main auditorium. 400 people filed in their faces, showing various combinations of confusion, exhaustion, and dawning fear. Lieutenant General Hatcher stood on the stage, illuminated by overhead lights that made him look carved from granite. Generals Blackwell and Merrick flanked him. Colonel Graves sat at a table to the side, his laptop open, his expression neutral. Hatcher didn't wait for complete silence. He just started talking, and people shut up immediately. In the next 72 hours, Fort Dawson will undergo the most comprehensive culture investigation in its history. Every soldier on this installation will be interviewed. Every disciplinary action from the past 12 months will be reviewed. Every report, every complaint, every incident will be examined for patterns of misconduct or negligence. 400 people held their collective breath. Earlier tonight, a soldier was assaulted in the barracks. That assault was the direct result of a command climate that has over time prioritized appearance over substance, that has valued statistics over standards, that has created an environment where reporting misconduct is seen as disloyalty and silence is rewarded. Hatcher's voice didn't rise, but it carried to every corner of the auditorium. This ends now, today, this moment. He gestured to Blackwell, who stood and addressed the room with the kind of authority that made people sit up straighter involuntarily. Starting at 0600 hours, all company commanders will assemble their units. You will inform them that Fort Dawson is under lockdown. No training, no field exercises, no off-post passes except for documented emergencies. For the next 3 days, this installation will focus on one thing: honest conversation about what has gone wrong and how we fix it. Major General Merrick took over. We will conduct town halls, open forums where any soldier can speak without fear of reprisal. We want to know who feels unsafe, who has been ignored, who has seen misconduct go unaddressed. This is not optional participation. Every soldier will attend. Every soldier will have the opportunity to be heard. Colonel Graves closed his laptop with a soft click that somehow carried through the auditorium. And let me be absolutely clear. Retaliation against any soldier who comes forward will be prosecuted with the full weight of the UCMJ. If we find that anyone attempts to intimidate, threaten, or punish a soldier for speaking truthfully, that person will face criminal charges. 0 tolerance, 0 exceptions. The silence was profound. Hatcher stepped forward again. Some of you are wondering how this happened, how an installation with such good statistics could be so broken underneath. The answer is simple. You measured the wrong things. You rewarded people for keeping numbers low instead of for maintaining actual discipline. You created a system where ambitious officers learned that the path to promotion was paved with buried reports and silenced soldiers. He paused. Let that sink in like a blade between ribs. That system killed my son 3 years ago. He was bullied and hazed at Fort Riley until he couldn't take it anymore. His chain of command knew. They did nothing. They protected the statistics. They protected themselves. And my son died believing the Army didn't care about him. The auditorium was so quiet, you could hear the ventilation system. I will not let that happen again. Not here, not anywhere. If that means ending careers, I will end careers. If that means making examples, I will make examples. If that means tearing down this command structure and rebuilding it from scratch, then that is exactly what we will do. Hatcher looked out over 400 faces and saw his message landing. You have until 0600 hours to prepare your soldiers. Inform them. Be honest. Tell them that Fort Dawson is about to change, and that change will be uncomfortable, but it is necessary. Dismissed. The room emptied in stunned silence. No conversations, no questions. Just people processing the fact that their world had just shifted on its axis and nothing would ever be quite the same. Outside, the first hints of dawn touched the eastern horizon, painting the desert in shades of gray and gold. Fort Dawson woke to a new reality, one where silence was no longer safe and truth was no longer optional. And in her bunk in Bravo Barracks, Corporal Reese Thornton lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what she had set in motion and whether she had done the right thing. She wouldn't have to wonder long. The answer was coming with the sunrise, in the form of 2,000 soldiers standing in formation, being told that one person's courage had just changed everything. 0600 hours. The parade ground. The sun rose over Fort Dawson, like a judgment, cold and absolute. 2,100 soldiers stood in formation on asphalt that still held the night's chill, their breath visible in the desert morning air. They had been given 15 minutes to assemble. No breakfast, no explanation. Just the order to fall in and wait. The silence was unnatural. Normally, a formation this size carried the ambient noise of 2,000 people existing in the same space. Coughs, shifting weight, whispered questions. But this morning, Fort Dawson stood frozen, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It dropped at 0603. 3 Humvees rolled onto the parade ground and stopped in a line facing the formation. Lieutenant General Hatcher emerged from the center vehicle, followed by Generals Blackwell and Merrick. They walked to a hastily erected podium with a microphone, their movements deliberate and measured. Hatcher didn't waste time with pleasantries. Fort Dawson, attention. 2,000 soldiers snapped to attention as one, the sound of boot heels striking pavement echoing across the empty desert. At ease. They shifted to parade rest, but the tension didn't ease. If anything, it wound tighter. Last night, one of your fellow soldiers was assaulted in the barracks. The assault was committed by an intoxicated soldier who has since been taken into custody. Under normal circumstances, this would be handled through standard disciplinary channels, and you would hear about it through official statements and rumor. Hatcher paused. These are not normal circumstances. The formation waited. The soldier who was assaulted is Corporal Reese Thornton of Bravo Company. She reported the assault immediately and accurately, as she was trained to do. What she didn't know is that her report would trigger an investigation that has been building for 6 months. An investigation into the command climate of this installation. An investigation that has now found sufficient evidence to warrant a complete operational stand-down. You could have heard a pin drop on concrete. Fort Dawson is now under lockdown for the next 72 hours. All training is suspended. All operations are frozen. You will remain on this installation unless there is a documented family emergency. For the next 3 days, we are going to do something that should have been done months ago. We are going to have an honest conversation about what has gone wrong here. Hatcher stepped away from the microphone and began walking along the front of the formation, his voice carrying without electronic amplification. It was a technique he had learned from a sergeant major 30 years ago. If you want soldiers to listen, make them work for it. Make them strain to hear. They'll remember every word. Some of you are wondering what Corporal Thornton did that was so important it shut down an entire base. She didn't hack into classified systems. She didn't commit espionage. She didn't violate operational security. What she did was worse from the perspective of people who wanted to keep this installation looking clean on paper. He stopped in front of Bravo Company, his eyes scanning the ranks. She told the truth. She documented misconduct. She reported violations that her chain of command wanted to ignore. And when she was attacked for it, she reported that too. One soldier, one notebook, one decision to choose integrity over convenience. Hatcher turned to face the entire formation. Starting at 0800 hours, we will conduct company-level town halls. These are not optional. These are not briefings where you sit quietly and listen. These are conversations where you will be asked direct questions and expected to give honest answers. We want to know who feels unsafe on this installation, who has been harassed, who has reported misconduct and been ignored, Who has witnessed violations and stayed silent because speaking up seemed pointless or dangerous? Brigadier General Blackwell stepped forward. Her voice cut through the morning air like a scalpel. Let me be absolutely clear about something. If you come forward with information, you will be protected. If anyone retaliates against you for speaking truthfully, they will be prosecuted. If you have seen something and said nothing, now is your chance to correct that. This is not about punishing soldiers who stayed quiet. This is about holding accountable the people who made speaking up dangerous. Major General Merrick joined them at the front. His voice was softer than Blackwell's, but no less intense. Some of you are scared right now. That's understandable. Change is frightening, especially when it comes suddenly, but I want you to think about something. Ask yourself if you feel safe here, if you trust your chain of command, if you believe that reporting misconduct will result in actual consequences for the people who violate standards. He let the question hang in the desert air. If you can't answer yes to those questions, then Fort Dawson is broken. And broken things need to be fixed, even if the fixing is painful. Hatcher stepped back to the microphone. You are dismissed to your company areas. Your commanders will brief you on the schedule for today. But before you go, I want to say one more thing. The formation waited. The soldier who was assaulted last night is standing in this formation right now. She's listening to me talk about her without using her name beyond what I've already said. She didn't ask to be the catalyst for this investigation. She didn't want to be the reason Fort Dawson is under lockdown. She just wanted to do her job and trust that the system would work the way it was supposed to work. Hatcher's voice dropped, forcing everyone to lean in mentally. That soldier showed more courage last night than most of you will be asked to show in your entire military career. Not the courage to charge an enemy position or defuse a bomb. The courage to stand alone in a hallway at midnight and choose truth over silence. Remember that when you're sitting in those town halls today. Remember that one person acting with integrity just changed the trajectory of an entire installation. He stepped back. Company commanders, take charge of your formations. Dismissed. The formation broke like a dam, releasing pressure. 2,000 soldiers began moving toward their company areas, the silence finally breaking into urgent conversations, questions, speculation. And somewhere in the middle of Bravo Company's formation, Corporal Reese Thornton walked with her platoon, feeling every eye in the company, trying to find her without being obvious about it. 0800 hours, Bravo Company area. The town hall was held in the company classroom, a space designed for 40 people that now held 73 soldiers packed shoulder to shoulder. Someone had set up folding chairs in rough rows, but half the company stood against the walls because there wasn't enough seating. General Blackwell sat at the front of the room in a metal folding chair, looking completely at ease despite being surrounded by nervous junior enlisted soldiers. Colonel Graves sat beside her with a laptop taking notes. Master Sergeant Calloway stood by the door, his presence steady and reassuring. Reese sat in the third row, trying to be invisible. Her cheek had progressed through several interesting colors overnight, now settling into a deep purple that no amount of concealer could hide. She kept her eyes forward, her posture parade ground perfect, and tried not to feel like every person in the room was staring at her. They were, of course, but with something closer to awe than judgment. Blackwell started without preamble. This is a safe space, not in the therapeutic sense, but in the practical sense. Nothing you say here will be used against you unless you confess to a crime. If you witnessed misconduct and didn't report it, you will not face charges. We are looking for information, not scapegoats. She paused. Let that settle. I'm going to start by asking a simple question, and I want you to raise your hand if the answer is yes. Don't think about it. Don't look around to see what others are doing. Just answer honestly. The room held its breath. Who in this room has felt unsafe at some point during their time at Fort Dawson? 3 hands went up immediately, then 2 more, then 5 more. Within 10 seconds, 23 hands were raised, nearly a third of the company. Blackwell's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes hardened. Thank you. You can lower your hands. She made a note. Next question. Who has witnessed harassment or assault and didn't report it because you thought nothing would happen? More hands. 31 this time. Who has filed an official report that you believe was ignored or suppressed? 15 hands. Who has been discouraged from filing a report by someone in your chain of command? 18 hands. Blackwell closed her notebook. All right, now we're going to have a conversation. I want to hear specific examples. Names, dates, what happened, what you did about it. Colonel Graves will document everything. If you're uncomfortable speaking in front of the group, you can request a private interview, but I encourage you to speak here because I think you'll find you're not alone. Silence. The kind that comes before someone jumps off a high dive. Then Private Jessica Brennan stood up. 20 years old, thin as wire, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested she had been holding something in for too long. Ma'am, I want to talk about Corporal Whitfield. Blackwell gestured for her to continue. Brennan's voice shook slightly, but she pushed through. 6 months ago, Corporal Whitfield started making comments about my appearance during PT, sexual comments, about my body, about what he wanted to do. I told him to stop. He laughed, said I should take it as a compliment. She took a breath. I reported it to my squad leader. He told me Whitfield was just joking and I was being too sensitive, so I reported it to Captain Drummond. He asked me what I was wearing during PT, like that mattered. Then he told me that I needed to grow thicker skin if I wanted to survive in the Army, that men talk trash and I should learn to handle it. Brennan's hands were clenched at her sides. The comments didn't stop. They got worse. 3 months ago, Whitfield cornered me in the supply room and touched me, just put his hand on me like he had every right. I pushed him away and threatened to report him again. He said nobody would believe me because I already had a reputation as someone who couldn't take a joke. The room was absolutely still. I didn't report it. I stopped going anywhere alone. I changed my workout schedule so I wouldn't be in the gym at the same time as him. I just tried to make myself invisible. She looked directly at General Blackwell. Last month, I started thinking about ways to get out of the Army, or ways to hurt myself badly enough to get medically evacuated, just so I wouldn't have to be here anymore. Blackwell's voice was gentle but firm. Thank you for your courage, Private Brennan. What you described is sexual harassment and sexual assault. Both are criminal offenses. Corporal Whitfield will be investigated and prosecuted if the evidence supports it. Captain Drummond's response to your initial report constitutes dereliction of duty at minimum. She paused. I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. If you had known that your report would be taken seriously, would you have reported the assault when it happened? Brennan nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yes, ma'am. I would have reported everything. I just didn't think anyone cared. We care. Blackwell's voice carried absolute certainty. And I'm sorry that you were failed by your chain of command. That failure ends today. Another soldier stood. Corporal James Whitfield, 26 years old, built like a linebacker. Ma'am, I need to say something. The room tensed. Several soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Whitfield's face was pale. I was deployed to Syria 2 years ago with 4th Brigade. Good deployment. No issues. When I came back, I requested transfer to Fort Dawson because my wife's family lives in Albuquerque. I got here 8 months ago. He paused, gathering himself. 2 months after I arrived, I was jumped by 3 soldiers from another company. They beat me pretty badly. Broke 2 ribs, concussion, black eyes. They did it because I'm Jewish, and they thought that was funny. They called me things I won't repeat in front of this group. Blackwell leaned forward. Did you report it? Yes, ma'am. Filed a full report with MP. Identified 2 of the 3 attackers. The third was wearing a balaclava, so I couldn't see his face. Whitfield's jaw clenched. The 2 I identified were questioned. Both said I started the fight, and they were defending themselves. No witnesses came forward, even though the fight happened in the parking lot, where people definitely saw it. The investigation was closed as inconclusive. Who conducted the investigation? Captain Drummond, ma'am. He told me that without witnesses or physical evidence beyond injuries that could have come from any altercation, there was nothing he could do. Suggested I be more careful about who I antagonized. Colonel Graves looked up from his laptop. Did you antagonize anyone, Corporal? No, sir. I was walking to my car after evening chow. They came up behind me. Graves made a note. We'll be reopening that investigation with proper investigative resources. Whitfield sat down. Another soldier stood, then another. The stories came like water from a broken dam, each one revealing another crack in Fort Dawson's foundation. Specialist Lisa Carmichael described being propositioned by a senior NCO who promised to help her career if she was friendly and threatened to tank her evaluations if she wasn't. She had reported it. The report disappeared. Private Marcus Anderson talked about being hazed for being the smallest soldier in his platoon, forced to do extra duty, denied leave, subjected to daily verbal abuse that his squad leader called building character. Sergeant Thomas Wade admitted to witnessing harassment multiple times and saying nothing because that's just how things are. On and on. 12 separate incidents in Bravo Company alone. 12 moments where soldiers had trusted the system and the system had failed them. Through it all, Reese sat silently listening to stories she had documented in her notebook, being told aloud by the people who lived them. She felt Master Sergeant Calloway's eyes on her. Once saw him nod. Slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement. You did this, that nod said. You gave them permission to speak. At 1000 hours, General Blackwell called a halt. We'll break for 15 minutes. When we come back, I want to talk about moving forward, about what changes need to happen, and how we implement them. The soldiers filed out for air for water for a moment to process. Reese started to stand, but Blackwell's voice stopped her. Corporal Thornton, a moment. Reese approached the front of the room, every nerve aware that this was a general officer asking for her time. Blackwell stood. Up close, she was shorter than Reese had expected, but presence had nothing to do with height. I read your notebook last night. All of it. Every entry. Yes, ma'am? Most of the incidents described in this town hall are in your documentation. You knew about all of this and kept recording it, even when nothing happened. Yes, ma'am. Blackwell studied her. Why, most soldiers would have stopped after the first few reports went nowhere. What made you keep going? Reese thought about Tommy, about the notebook he had kept before the drugs took over, full of thoughts he never shared and dreams he never achieved, about how after he died, that notebook was the only way their parents could understand what he had been feeling. My brother taught me that writing things down makes them real, ma'am. Even if nobody reads it, even if nothing changes, at least there's a record that it happened, that someone saw and remembered. Your brother sounds like a wise person. He was, ma'am, before he wasn't. Blackwell didn't ask for elaboration, and Reese was grateful. Instead, the general did something unexpected. She extended her hand for a handshake. The Army failed you and your fellow soldiers, Corporal. We are going to fix that. But I want you to know that your actions over the past 4 months, and especially your decision to report last night, may have saved lives. Soldiers like Private Brennan, who were contemplating self-harm. Soldiers like Corporal Whitfield, who were losing faith in the institution. Reese shook the general's hand, feeling the firmness of the grip, the calluses that spoke of a career spent doing more than sitting behind desks. Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me yet. This gets harder before it gets easier. Blackwell was right. It got much harder. 1200 hours. The stockade. PFC Garrett Hollis sat in the interview room, his wrists in handcuffs that were secured to a ring bolted to the table. He had been awake for 36 hours, the adrenaline and whiskey long since metabolized, leaving only exhaustion and the growing realization of what he had done. Major General Merrick sat across from him. Not the JAG officer Garrett had expected, not the MP investigator, a 2-star general looking at him with eyes that had seen soldiers at their best and worst. PFC Hollis, I'm General Merrick. I'm here to ask you some questions about last night. Garrett's voice came out hoarse. I already confessed to the MPs. I told them everything. I know I read the report, but I want to hear it from you directly. Not because I doubt the MPs, but because I want to understand how we got here. Garrett slumped in his chair. I hit her. Corporal Thornton, I was drunk and angry, and I hit her. There's nothing else to understand. Why were you angry? Because she's perfect, and I'm not. Because everything I try to do, she does better. Because my father calls me every week to tell me I'm a disappointment. And I look at her and see everything I'm supposed to be. And I couldn't take it anymore. Merrick leaned back. Did Corporal Thornton ever do anything to you directly? Sabotage you? Undermine you? Spread rumors? No. She was always professional, always correct. That was the problem. She made it look easy. So you blamed her for your own shortcomings. Garrett's eyes filled with tears. I blamed her because it was easier than blaming myself. I blamed her because if she was the problem, then I didn't have to change. And I drank because the whiskey made the blame feel justified. Merrick was quiet for a long moment. PFC Hollis, you're going to face court-martial for assault. You'll likely be convicted. You'll probably spend time in a military prison and receive a dishonorable discharge. Your military career is over. Garrett nodded, unable to speak. But I want you to understand something. You didn't just hurt Corporal Thornton last night. You hurt yourself. You hurt your family. And you hurt every soldier who's struggling with similar demons because you just gave them an example of the worst possible outcome. I know. Do you really understand that there's a private right now, sitting in his room, thinking about hitting the bottle to deal with his stress, and he's going to remember that a PFC at Fort Dawson did that, and it destroyed his life? Or a corporal who's falling behind his peers, wondering if violence is the answer. And now, he has your example. Garrett's tears fell freely now. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. Don't tell me. When this is over, when you've served your sentence, when you're trying to rebuild your life on the outside, you find ways to tell your story. You warn people. You be the example of what not to do. That's the only way you make any of this mean something. Merrick stood. We're done here. The JAG will contact you about your defense counsel. General. Garrett's voice stopped him at the door. Is Corporal Thornton okay? She's fine. She's stronger than either of us, I suspect. But that's not your concern anymore. The door closed, leaving Garrett alone with the weight of his choices. 1,500 hours. The parade ground again. Every soldier on Fort Dawson stood in formation once more, but the atmosphere was different now. The morning had been shock and confusion. The afternoon was something else. Understanding, maybe, or the beginning of it. The town halls had happened in every company. The stories had been collected. The pattern was clear and undeniable. Fort Dawson had been rotting from the inside, and only luck had prevented something worse than what happened to Reese. Lieutenant General Hatcher stood at the podium again, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the parade ground. This morning I told you we were going to have honest conversations. We've had them. Colonel Graves has documented 143 separate incidents of misconduct, harassment, or assault that were either ignored or actively suppressed by various levels of this command structure over the past 18 months. The number hit like a physical blow. 143 soldiers who trusted the system and were failed by it. 143 reasons why Fort Dawson is broken. 143 pieces of evidence that we need to rebuild from the foundation up. Hatcher paused, letting the magnitude settle. Effective immediately, the following personnel are relieved of their commands pending investigation and possible court-martial. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, Captain Drummond, Captain Richardson, Captain Valdez. Additionally, 4 senior NCOs are suspended from duties pending investigation. The formation absorbed this silently. New leadership will be installed within 48 hours. A new company commander for Bravo Company. A new battalion commander. New policies regarding reporting and investigation of misconduct. And something else. Hatcher stepped away from the podium. We are establishing what we're calling the Thornton Protocol, named after Corporal Reese Thornton, whose documentation of misconduct and whose courage in reporting her assault exposed the systemic failures of this command. In the formation, Reese felt her face flush. Every soldier in Bravo Company was trying not to look at her and failing. The Thornton Protocol is simple. Every soldier, on every installation, will have access to a confidential reporting system that bypasses the immediate chain of command. Reports will go directly to the Inspector General's office. Reporters will be protected by regulation from retaliation. And every report will be investigated by qualified personnel within 72 hours. Hatcher's voice intensified. No more reports disappearing. No more soldiers being told to handle it at their level. No more commanders prioritizing statistics over standards. If you see misconduct, you report it. If you're victimized, you report it. And it will be taken seriously or heads will roll. Is that clear? A thunderous, "Yes, sir," rolled across the parade ground. Good. This installation will be under modified lockdown for another 48 hours while we complete interviews and implement new procedures. But I want you to understand something. What happened here over the past 18 months was not inevitable. It was the result of choices made by people in positions of authority who chose wrong, who chose appearance over substance, who chose their own careers over your welfare. He scanned the formation. You deserve better. You are America's sons and daughters, and you volunteered to serve this nation.
The least we owe you is a command structure that values your dignity and safety as much as it values combat readiness. And if we can't provide that, then we don't deserve to lead you. Hatcher came to attention. 2,000 soldiers mirrored him instantly. Fort Dawson will recover from this. You will recover from this. And when you do, you will be stronger, more resilient, and more capable because you will know absolutely that your leadership has your back. Dismissed. The formation broke. Soldiers moved toward their company areas, conversations erupting like wildfire. The story of Fort Dawson's 72-hour reckoning would be told, and retold, would spread to other installations, would become part of Army lore. But in that moment, it was just soldiers processing understanding, beginning to believe that maybe possibly things could actually change. 1,800 hours. Small conference room. Reese sat across from Master Sergeant Calloway, both of them exhausted in the particular way that comes from stress rather than physical exertion. "How are you holding up, Thornton?" She considered the question. Her face still hurt. Her mind felt like it had been running a marathon for 24 hours. But underneath all of that was something else, something she couldn't quite name. "I don't know, Sergeant. I didn't expect any of this. Nobody ever does. But you handled it with more grace than most officers I've seen." Calloway leaned back in his chair. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course, Sergeant." 20 years ago, I saw a soldier get hazed so badly he tried to kill himself. I reported it. The investigation went nowhere. The soldier was quietly transferred. The hazers got counseling statements that disappeared from their files within 6 months. I was told I needed to be a better team player. He looked at his hands. "I stayed in the Army because I loved it, because I believed in it. But I stopped fighting battles I thought I couldn't win. I documented. I reported. But I accepted that nothing would change. I became part of the problem by accepting it as normal." Calloway met Reese's eyes. "You reminded me what I used to be, before I got tired, before I got cynical. You did what I should have kept doing all these years. You refused to accept that broken was normal. I just wrote things down, Sergeant. No, you did more than that. You stayed faithful to the standard, even when everyone around you had abandoned it. That's not just documentation. That's moral courage. And it's rarer than you think." He stood. "The generals want to give you the Army Commendation Medal. They're writing it up now. And between you and me, I think you'll probably get promoted ahead of your peers when the time comes. You've earned it." Reese stood as well. "I don't want recognition, Sergeant. I just wanted people to be safe." "I know. That's why you deserve it." 2,100 hours. Outside the barracks. Reese sat on a bench near the PT field watching the sun set over the New Mexico desert. The sky burned in shades of orange and purple, beautiful and indifferent to the human drama playing out beneath it. She heard footsteps and looked up to see Private Brennan approaching hesitantly. "Mind if I sit, Corporal?" "Go ahead." They sat in silence for a moment watching the sunset paint the world in fire. "I wanted to thank you," Brennan said quietly, "for documenting what happened to me, for caring when nobody else did." "You don't need to thank me." "Yes, I do. 3 weeks ago I was planning how to hurt myself, badly enough to get sent home. I had it all worked out. What I would do, how I would make it look like an accident." Brennan's voice shook. "I was going to do it next week. But then this happened. And suddenly people cared. Suddenly it mattered." Reese felt her throat tighten. "I'm sorry you felt that alone. It's not your fault, but it is your credit that I don't feel that way anymore. You saved my life, Corporal. You saved a lot of lives. I hope you know that." They sat together as the sun disappeared and the stars began to appear. Two soldiers finding a moment of peace after 72 hours of chaos. 72 hours later. Final formation. Fort Dawson assembled one last time before resuming normal operations. The lockdown was ending. The investigation would continue, but the crisis phase was over. Lieutenant General Hatcher stood at the podium, but this time his expression was less severe. Not soft, but perhaps satisfied. "Fort Dawson, over the past 3 days, we have dismantled a broken culture and begun building something better. We have relieved 9 officers and NCOs from their positions. We have identified 143 victims of misconduct who will receive justice. We have implemented new reporting procedures that will spread Army-wide within 6 months." He paused.
But most importantly, we have sent a message. That message is simple. The Army takes care of its soldiers, or it deserves to fail. There is no third option. There is no acceptable middle ground where we tolerate misconduct for the sake of statistics or convenience. Hatcher gestured to his left, where Corporal Reese Thornton stood in her dress uniform, a small blue and white ribbon, now affixed above her other awards. This soldier was awarded the Army Commendation Medal yesterday for exemplary service. The citation reads in part, Corporal Thornton's unwavering integrity and moral courage in the face of systemic failure exemplifies the highest traditions of military service. Her actions directly resulted in the protection of fellow soldiers and the restoration of proper command climate. The formation remained silent, but Reese could feel the respect radiating from 2,000 soldiers. But that medal doesn't capture what Corporal Thornton really did. She showed us that one person acting with integrity can change an entire system. That silence is not inevitable. That broken can be fixed if someone is willing to pay the price of speaking truth. Hatcher's voice dropped, became almost conversational. I've been in the Army 40 years. I've seen soldiers do extraordinary things in combat. I've seen courage that defies understanding. But I've also learned that the hardest courage to find is not in battle. It's in the quiet moments. It's standing in a hallway at midnight and choosing to report rather than hide. It's documenting misconduct even when you think nothing will happen. It's trusting the system even when the system has failed you repeatedly. He looked directly at Reese. That's the courage that builds institutions. That's the courage that keeps the Army worthy of the soldiers who serve in it. And Corporal Thornton has it in abundance. Reese stood at attention, her face carefully neutral, trying not to feel the weight of every eye on Fort Dawson. Hatcher turned back to the formation. You are dismissed to resume normal operations. Remember what happened here. Remember that standards matter. Remember that every soldier deserves dignity and safety. And remember that if you see something wrong, you have not just the right, but the duty to report it. Fort Dawson will never again be a place where silence is safer than truth. The formation held for one more beat, then broke. Soldiers moved toward their duty stations, toward the resumption of training, toward normalcy. But it was a different kind of normal. One where the Thornton Protocol was posted in every company area, where new commanders walked in knowing their predecessors had been relieved for misconduct, where soldiers whispered the story of the corporal who shut down an entire base and made it better. Reese walked back to Bravo Company, Master Sergeant Calloway, falling into step beside her. You ready for this to be over? He asked. Is it over? The emergency part is. But you know you're going to be famous now, right? Every soldier on this base knows your name. Every installation in the Army is going to hear this story. Reese grimaced. I didn't want to be famous. I just wanted to do my job. I know, but sometimes doing your job means becoming an example. You'll carry that for the rest of your career. Calloway paused. The good news is, you've got people watching your back now. You're not alone anymore. He was right. Over the next weeks, as Fort Dawson slowly returned to operations, Reese found herself approached by soldiers she didn't know. A quiet thank you in the dining facility. A nod of respect from an NCO she had never met. A private asking if she had advice about reporting harassment she had become without wanting to assemble. A reminder that the system could work if someone was brave enough to make it work. 6 weeks after the lockdown, Reese received orders. Transfer to the Non-Commissioned Officer Academy as an instructor. Someone in the assignment branch had decided that her particular brand of integrity was worth spreading to the next generation of NCOs. The day before she left Fort Dawson, she stood once more at the PT field looking at the desert sunset. Master Sergeant Calloway found her there like he had that first night. Leaving tomorrow? Yes, Sergeant. 0600. You know why they're sending you to the NCO Academy? To teach, I assume. Calloway shook his head. They're sending you there because you're proof. Proof that the system can be fixed. Proof that one person can matter. Every NCO who graduates from that academy after meeting you will carry a piece of that proof with them. He extended his hand. It's been an honor serving with you, Corporal Thornton. She shook it, feeling the weight of what he wasn't saying, that she had restored his faith, that she had reminded him why he stayed in the Army all these years. The honor was mine, Sergeant. The next morning, Reese loaded her gear into a transport truck and left Fort Dawson. As the base disappeared in the rearview mirror, She thought about Tommy, about the notebook he had taught her to keep, about the truth he had told her to preserve. She pulled out her phone and typed a message she would never send because there was no one to receive it. I did it, Tommy. I wrote it down and it stayed true. And this time, someone cared enough to read it. She deleted the message, put the phone away, turned her attention to the road ahead. Behind her, Fort Dawson continued its transformation. New leaders implemented the Thornton Protocol. Soldiers learned to trust again. The culture slowly, painfully healed. And in every company area, in every briefing room, in every corner of the installation, people told the story. The story of a corporal who got hit in the face and chose truth over silence, who documented misconduct when no one was watching, who trusted the system even when it had failed her. The story of how one notebook, one report, one act of courage changed everything. Fort Dawson would never forget, and neither would the Army. The sun rose over the New Mexico desert, indifferent and eternal. But beneath that sun, in the formations, in the classrooms, in the quiet conversations between soldiers, something had changed. Something that started with a slap and ended with restoration. Something that proved broken. Things can be fixed if someone is willing to pay the price. Something that whispered in the voice of a 23-year-old corporal with a purple bruise and a clear conscience, truth matters. Courage matters. And one person standing alone can light a fire that burns away the darkness. Fort Dawson had learned that lesson. The Army would not forget it. And Corporal Reese Thornton, driving toward her next assignment with her notebook, in her assault pack, and her integrity intact, carried the proof that sometimes the smallest act of bravery changes everything. The end, but also the beginning.